You know, it dawned on me recently that there's a lot of newer players who come to my videos looking for advice or tips on how to play or what to play, and yet I've yet to make a video on some of the things I think new players should know or things that I wish I knew when I started playing. Now, obviously these are things that sort of just came to me as I was kind of sitting at work and trying to brainstorm an idea for this, because really there's so much you need to learn or so much that you could learn about this game that it would be hard for me to say, oh yeah, this is something that you should really do. With definitive answers, and it would be like a complete list. Like, that would be impossible. But I'm hoping that, you know, with the several hundred hours that I have in this game, that I have enough insight to give you a few tips that I think might come in handy should you decide to play this game and should you decide to pursue it, you know, as like a fun hobby, because it's a fun community. There's a lot of helpful people, but it can be kind of daunting trying to get into it, you know, as a new player. And I'm just going to jump right into this. I think the very first step that I'm going to recommend is playing the tutorial up here in the top. Now, I know some people kind of feel averse to playing tutorials, but really there's nothing wrong with starting off the game, having them teach you the mechanics. Honestly, it's the easiest way to learn anything. I didn't play the tutorial when I started playing. I just went straight into trying to get an achievement, and it took me way longer than I had to get that and to fulfill my goals, because I really didn't know what I was doing. And I actually played this tutorial like probably about a year after I started playing this game, like a year after release. And I learned a ton of stuff that I never knew. And really, it takes like no time. It's a couple hours of your life. It'll teach you all the basic mechanics, and you really won't have to know. You know, you won't really need one of these videos, to be honest with you. But if you want to keep watching, please keep watching. Okay. Second tip, I'm actually going to jump in here. We're just going to pick a random dude. I'm going to pick my old boy here in Bohemia. Schemes are a hugely important feature in Crusader Kings. Ignore that little sound here. They're your friend, okay? Schemes are your friend. There's all sorts of different kinds of schemes, all sorts of different things that you could do. So let's go for an example here. So my wife, she's got a 34. She thinks I'm okay, but we're not like married. We're not in love. So I'm going to romance her, right? This is a personal scheme. This is something that you should be doing with all kinds of people. Say you have a chancellor, for example, who doesn't like you. You should be trying to convince them, trying to sway them. I'm going to write her a love poem. Let's see. She doesn't like it, but that doesn't mean that it's over. I have a 95% chance to succeed, but that doesn't mean it's going to succeed, but that just means I have a 95% chance to succeed. But realistically speaking, all of your counselors, and really you in general as a player, should be doing something on this list with a scheme of some kind. You generally speaking only get one personal scheme, and then you only get one hostile scheme. There are certain trees, if I'm not mistaken, that let you change that. But for right now, let's just say an example. Say I'm trying to weaken Poland. Say that I am Bohemia, which is pretty strong anyway. But say I'm trying to weaken Poland. I would just go here. I'm going to start a murder scheme, and what you're going to do now, like as an example, this is something like have a murder scheme, and then make sure you set this guy to support your schemes, okay? Because now, look at that, it doubled in size because of that. So that's just the first one. Pay attention to schemes. Make sure you're always like thinking of something. Make sure you're always trying to either seduce somebody, you're always trying to woo somebody, you're always trying to murder somebody, you're always trying to do something. Wars can be ended with a kind word just as much as they can by killing a bunch of people's heirs. I have stopped the Mongol invasion by seducing Genghis Khan, basically, and I've also stopped it by just murdering him and all of his family. So pay attention to schemes. That's my first tip, or my second tip, I guess. My third one, I'm going to talk about what do you do with counselors? Like, what do I recommend doing and things that I wish I knew? So basically, you should be paying attention to what everybody is doing. Your bishop, number one thing, make sure that they like you, because if they don't like you, you're not going to get any of the taxes from their holding, and that's going to be a big deal because they usually end up getting a lot of money. As far as other things go, when I start a game, I always like to try to get domestic affairs with my chancellor, because I think that that's a big deal. It's more important for your vassals to like you than other people, because especially if you start off as like a small little county, it's much easier to get hostile factions started against you than otherwise. Going back to my council here, I always recommend for a steward to have them increasing development in your capital. This is where you're going to make most of your money. Wealth is power in Crusader Kings 3, and they should be increasing the development of your capital rather than just collecting taxes, because it's kind of like, as an example, trying to put all of your savings in a savings account and then expecting it to grow. Like, it's not going to. This is a better long-term idea. As for your marshal, if you're not at war, you should really be telling them to train commanders. Basically what I'm telling you here is like, pay attention to what your counselors are doing. Focus on your council. Make sure you check in periodically to see if they're still doing something. And if, like for example, sometimes if you have to increase county control, it'll just default back to organized army. You should always be training things. You might get a perk. Somebody you care about might get a perk. It's really useful. And just, it's good to know how these people are doing, because generally speaking, these are the most powerful people in your realm, and you kind of want them to, be happy. Also, a cool thing to note is that sometimes you can marry these people to other people. All of mine apparently are married, so they don't care. But it's a good way to get strong people in your court. And it's important to marry these people to pretty good people, because their heirs are also going to be on your court, realistically speaking, especially if they're one of your vassals. So having strong heirs rather than somebody with all fives who's this powerful vassal who wants to be on your council, I think it's a pretty good idea. So number 4, we're going to talk about marriage here for a second. So my dude here, he's got a ton of kids. So we can talk a little bit about marriage in that regard. Don't assume that relevant is going to be helpful to you at all, because realistically speaking, it probably isn't. It's going to just default to things that it thinks are relevant for you, but don't assume that the game is being helpful to you. Marriage is hugely important in Crusader Kings 3, and frankly is broken. Okay, it is broken as hell. You should be marrying people, alliance power, prestige gain, literally anything. You could even just be doing it for like a trait. Like say you wanted to marry this person because they have genius and you want that in your family line. Do that. Pay attention to marriage. It's not always about, especially early game, especially if you're playing as like a small group, it is not always about what alliance is biggest. It's about what is going to keep your line around longest. That is the thing that you really should be paying attention to. Say one of my vassals was really strong. Say this guy had like 10,000 troops or something, I don't know. And say that he was kind of angry and he kept starting up factions, and then his wife dies. You got a daughter lying around, because you might, like this guy, he's got a lot of kids lying around. It might be a good idea to use a marriage strategically to keep these vassals happy. This is especially useful early game, like in the earlier starts. So I highly recommend paying attention to marriages and planning out marriages. It's a good way to get hooks on different things. So for example, let's go here. Let's see. So this guy, he's got so for example, so say you're looking through marriages, you see a son like this. He's got claims in the Duchy of Bohemia. Let me see here. Let me see if I can find a good marriage. Okay, there you go. There you go, right here. So this person has a claim on this duchy over here, which is actually pretty solid. But if you want, you can try to sort of look for people. You can also invite claimants, but I'm sort of getting off topic here when it comes to marriage. But you can get claims on some pretty huge swaths of land. Like say I got a claim on Poland. One of my kids was married to one of the heirs. This guy died. Now that's their sibling is on the throne, right? I could technically annex it for my kid, and now my kid could be either, the husband or wife of whoever controls Poland. Very, very useful. Very useful for alliances, and also very useful potentially for your own player heirs. So pay attention to marriage. That's my number 4. And it's really pretty straightforward. You kind of just go into this tree. You click this. There's all sorts of options that you can toggle up in here. Definitely mess around with this if you have a problem with age difference. And, there's also the option to commit mass incest to get all your stats really high. People like to do that, so I probably would get yelled at if I didn't mention it. But yeah, that's also an option. Next, I'm going to talk about vassal contracts. But this is something that I really did not understand. So vassals are going to be under this the realm, and inside of this right here. You can change these, which is pretty interesting. You can say, I want this guy to have I want him to have higher levies. I want more levies from this guy. Okay, it's going to automatically default to tyranny, but what do you do in this situation? Well, in my opinion, the best ones to do here are to let them have war declaration rights or succession rights. But really war declaration or fortification, these are fine. Realistically speaking, not this. Do not give them this. If somebody has this, try everything in your power. You can lower this too, and that'll do it. Try everything in your power to get rid of council rights. Because there is nothing worse in this game than somebody getting a hook on you because you decided to be a fornicating little silly boy. And now you have a 6. You have a 6 spy master or something who has to be on your council for 25 years because he has a hook on you and his contract says he's guaranteed a council spot. Okay? Pay attention to that sort of stuff. Also, Crown Authority, you can change this kind of at will. In the earlier game, this isn't something that you're going to be able to mess around with too much. But if you're struggling with Liberty factions, it's probably because you defaulted with a higher Crown Authority and you can just lower that and it'll go away. Next, I'm going to talk about the children, and this is something, think about your kids. Think about what they're doing. A huge thing I think a lot of people miss is they don't focus their kids' education especially if it's your heir and you want them to be like a certain thing. Like this dude, I realistically probably wouldn't want him to be diplomacy focused, but he's already doing it and he's got a pretty high diplomacy. But like, what is your ward? Like, you should be warding your own kids. Like, for example, this guy's not warding any of his children, but you should be having your kids as your wards because this lets you pick their stats. You know what I mean? Like, realistically speaking, although you can also give them to other people for, you know, like opinion boosts if you want to, but that also means you're beholden to the AI for what stats they get. If you have decent stats, you're going to get like pairs of them. Or not stats, I should say, like traits. If you have decent traits, you'll get like different ones that match up with the one that you have, but you'll also just get the option to give them the ones that you already have. So if you like the ones you have, definitely give them to your children and just really just raise your kids. It's something that I think is really easily forgotten, especially if you start having a lot of them. Even if you don't necessarily plan on doing anything with them, just pay attention to what they're doing, pay attention to where they are, pay attention to who they're married to. And if, say, for example, since we were talking about marriage not that long ago, say this dude's like his spouse, say her dad dies. Now she's not a ruler anymore. Break that. Who cares? Take the penalty. Pay attention to that stuff because there's nothing worse than marrying somebody who's like kind of useless, especially if you're a smaller kingdom. And I know I said like alliances don't matter, but if it was a big alliance, you're kind of just wasting your time if that was the whole reason they were married. You know what I mean? So pay attention to what your kids are doing. Pay attention to the children. Think about them, okay? Next, I want to talk about skill trees. So something that I wish somebody would have recommended to me is to just play around with these. I know that sounds stupid, but in my brain, my monkey brain was like martial good because war. And like, really, that's not wrong. But realistically speaking, like the learning tree is hugely useful because you can do, where is it? Embrace celibacy right here. Second perk, restraint. This is enormously useful if you are starting off in the year like 800 and you are a tribal culture and you have Confederate partition and you don't want to ruin your whole kingdom by having 47 children because you're going to. You can stop that by just going into the learning tree, getting whole of body even later so that you can live a little bit longer. And it'll save yourself a lot of headache. Pay attention to these skill trees. My personal favorite is actually the stewardship tree after having played for so long because I love the architect tree. It's super great, especially if you want to play tall. But you won't know which one is your favorite unless you give them a try. So definitely play around with different styles. Don't be afraid to branch out and try something new. I personally don't love intrigue because I'm just not that kind of player. But some people find it really fun and it's just like they love it. But you won't know that unless you give them a try. So try all the trees. This next one's actually a really basic feature, but I wish somebody would have told me about this. So down here, you can actually find characters in this little search function. This can be super useful from just trying to see who has claims, trying to see marriage candidates, all kinds of stuff. It is incredible. You can find titles. You can find all kinds of stuff. This down here, this more feature, I wish somebody would have talked to me about this. I wish somebody would have been like, hey, I don't even know if this is in the tutorial. It might be. I probably forgot. But use the search function. It's super handy. I'm going to talk about war for these next few points, but my tip number one, make sure you actually move your rally point. Also, you can make more than one. You can set them up in any of your counties, on any of your borders, and then you can raise your armies either at one of them or at all of them. Say you're getting attacked from all sides. I don't know why that would happen to you. I would hope it wouldn't happen to you as like a little county like this. But just pay attention to where your rally points are, because there's nothing worse than being like, you know, let's say you're the Byzantines and you're fighting the Seljuk, but your rally point is over here and you never fixed it. So now your army has to go all the way across your empire. Say they have a lot of siege equipment. They're already taking castles while your silly little face is walking across the entire breadth of East Asia. Like, come on. I don't know directions. That wasn't East Asia. Number two, I want to talk about really fast. I want to talk about supply lines. This is a big one that I think I struggled with pretty hard too. It's not going to be as clear here because I'm not going to start the game because I don't want anything to happen. But if you see here, there's this thing called supply limit. Every army is going to have it, and every county is going to have its own supply limit, no matter where you go, if it's in enemy territory or your own. And you're going to want to pay attention. If it's red when you're going into it, your army is too big. You need to break them up. You need to move them around, especially if like you want to resupply, and I highly recommend you do this. Do not just keep going to war until your army is attritioned all the way to where you only have 100 troops. If you send them home to a home county, they will replenish troops. They will get more back. They will replenish their supplies. There's nothing wrong with doing a little tactical retreat from the war for a second to replenish troops. And so two things. Focus on the supply limit. Don't just be busting through when you see that red skull and be like, well, that's going to happen. It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to. It will happen in certain instances. Like sieges, it's unavoidable. I think it's like a 1% guarantee or 10% guarantee. I can't remember what it is. And sometimes it's going to happen. It's going to be unavoidable, but you can avoid a lot of headache by not just steamrolling around with like a 35 size, army. I don't know what I mean by 35. I mean like 35,000 troops. That's what I mean. This third tip, I want to talk about men-at-arms. So especially early game, these are huge because levies realistically, like they're useless. You don't need that many of them. I know that it looks like some armies are really strong, but if you actually go and hover over this, you'll see that a lot of them, I mean, these guys have a few, but a lot of them don't actually have that many men-at-arms troops. And so what you're going to do, like say I want to take over Pomeranian. Let me look at their troops. Okay, so they got bowmen, they got pikemen, they got armored footmen. Do I have things that counter those? And these are things that you should be looking at when you're starting off the game and you want to set yourself up for success. You want to look and see, do your men-at-arms counter their men-at-arms? Because that's going to be the biggest difference between you succeeding and you failing in the early game. Because those men-at-arms counters will hurt a whole lot. So will your captains. Pay attention that you actually have good captains here because they will make a world of difference. If you have strong captains and strong men-at-arms, it doesn't matter if they have double the troops of you, you're most likely going to win that encounter. Also, make sure you have siege equipment. I know that it can be kind of annoying because the initial cost is kind of high, but sieges are much more bearable if you don't have, if you don't have to wait 3 years for a single castle to fall. This last one I can't demonstrate for you, but if you're a culture that can raid stuff, raid like you have never raided before. Don't do it with such reckless abandon that you pillage every major capital, every major hold. Raid until you have taken the plunder of every single land you think feasibly possible. If you start off as a culture that can raid, your entire, in my opinion, first life, your whole beginning existence should be solely raiding and acquiring wealth. You should have so much money by the end of that person's life as a tribal or whatever you happen to be that you don't have to worry about money for like 3 lifetimes. You should raid. Do it. Don't be scared. It's so easy to even if you lose and you lose some of your money, it's easy to get those troops back and to bounce back. So just raid. Okay? Just do it. This next one, I'm going to actually go back to the main menu here. And we're going to go back to the new game. And what I want to talk about is for a second is the game rules. Read the game rules. There's a lot of different ones that you can tweak that they don't necessarily have to be there by default. This one might be a little more difficult if you've never played the game. But you can make the game a lot easier or harder for yourself by switching this stuff around. So I think it's important for players to at least become semi-familiar with what their rule set is. Also, definitely give Iron Man a try. I've talked about this in other videos, but Iron Man basically just makes it so that you have to put more thought and effort into what you're doing. So you're not necessarily just save scumming every time something bad happens. It's a really good way to eliminate any mistakes that you're making in your games. And you'll just become a better player for it, in my opinion. So those are my 2 tips, really, is to check out the game rules and also give Iron Man a try. And honestly, for this last one, let me go back here so that you can actually see what I was talking about too. All right, so I got raiders. I'm at war, so this is something that's important. I can't actually call my raiders right now, so I guess I just wasted my time here. Whatever. We got the invasion of Northumbria. Who cares? Take the game slow. You do not have to rush to do anything. Even if you have a huge goal, even if you know what you want to do, there is no reason to be playing at the 5 game speed unless you just absolutely cannot stand to sit and wait. If you are new to this game, relax. Relax. Calm down. Play slow. You learn the mechanics. If it takes you a while, if you want to play on the slow speed or the slowest speed because a lot of stuff is happening really fast and it's hard to process, then do that. Play slowly. Take your time. There's a lot to be learned in this game. There's a lot to glean. And there's a lot of really excellent writing that you're going to otherwise miss if you're just rushing around. Slow down the pace, relax, enjoy the journey, and I hope genuinely that these tips have been useful to you because honestly, as a new player once, there were so many channels that I turned to that had some really great guides, but I feel like at this point, some of those might be hard to go back to because maybe you don't know where to search. So I hope that this provides some insight. And if you want some other recommendations, I definitely recommend like Italian Spartacus, One Proud Bavarian, even the Spiffing Brit because of his exploit videos that'll show you like what you can do if you want to be an exploiter, if you want to achieve, beyond the meta. Like, definitely check out those YouTubers too. They make great videos. But that is going to be it for me for this video. I hope these tips find you well. I hope they're useful. If you like them, you know the drill. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Soul. This has been another Crusader Kings 3 video, and I will see you in the next one.